loved this church more than my father, Bishop McKinley Young. And what he loved most about the church was that the church not only provided a community, but it was a home of social activism. It also provided opportunity for people to do better and be better. It connected Black people all over the world. He loved nothing more than to say, oh, you know, that person's an AME, or, you know, that person's an AME. I can call them and I can ask them this, or, you know, we can figure this problem out, or we can solve this problem. And through the work that he did and through his passion for the work that he did, I saw how much my father loved seeing other gifts in people. My dad never had to be the number one. He never had to be the first one. He thought we were all better at the table. And seeing his example of leadership has definitely set me on a path to not only respect and know that other people have gifts and talents, but that if we all work together, we come together with those gifts and talents, we can do absolutely anything. And I have the unique experience of having my dad being elected when I was 8 years old. Most people whose parents become bishops are much older. They're either teenagers or they are out of the house. So I was fully immersed. I had, you know, he was at Big Bethel AME Church in Atlanta for 12 years. And I was born during his time there. But that was my only kind of real home church experience. I've been kind of popping around. I've had home churches, you know, all over the connection. But him being elected at 8 years old, moving to Cape Town, South Africa, and we actually lived there. I know that sometimes people don't always like fully live there. They go during conference season or they spend half the year there, but we lived there. I went to school there. I was fully immersed in South African culture. I picked up Afrikaans really quickly. I would be translating for my parents. We were at annual conferences. When someone would come by the room and ask a question, when we first got there, we traveled the entire country because the schooling's year round. So we came in, I think, October-ish. And we traveled around the entire country. I went to all of their conferences. And my parents always pushed me out front. They made me get up and sing a song or do something. So I was fully a part of their work. And I got to see it firsthand. And then I got to see the first Democratic election. In South Africa. So during that time period, Nelson Mandela was freed in 1990. He actually came to Big Bethel. I met him and Winnie Mandela there. Then we moved to South Africa in 92. He became the president in 94. So I know my parents worked on this, and I know the connection was a part of this as well. Voter education, drives, and rallies. And I remember I'm going to say we were in the Kalahari Desert and having a big hall full of all these people who were ready to go vote. And they were talking about the election. They had ballots to show people what a ballot would look like, when they go into that booth. And I remember all the energy and the excitement of the moment and living in the new South Africa, kind of transitioning from that old South Africa to the new South Africa, drawing the new flag, drawing, the shape of the country and how it all changed. So all of that made a huge impact on me. And I don't think I realized it until I became an adult. And now that I am working in voting right now, ironically, and I have worked in public service, it's definitely been from what I have seen from the church, what I've understood from the church, also the politics of the church. All of those things have played a huge role in my life. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that when I graduated from Hampton University, I was a journalism major, and I was trying to find my first opportunity. And my parents loved the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer on PBS. Gwen Ifill, who was also an AME, was one of the anchors there. And there was an internship program. My dad said, I'm gonna reach out to Gwen Ifill through, I think, her brother, presiding elder Ifill in the 6th district. And he did. I connected with Gwen, and she said to me, I will help you get an interview, but when you get here, you got to show us where when you get to the interview, you're on your own, basically. And I got to that interview. I did a great job. And I got hired. It was a 6-month internship. I got hired about 4 months into that 6-month internship. But I remember Gwen saying that to me. And being in the position I'm in now, I know how hard it is to sometimes recommend people. They're like, oh, my kid wants to do this. And you're like, ooh, I don't know if your kid really actually has the skills to do it. And I'm a little uncomfortable. But she gave me that opportunity, but she also let me know, like, it's going to be up to me. And that was a great lesson for me to learn in that moment. And I stood on my own 2 feet, and I've been standing on my own 2 feet ever since that moment. But it was the church. It's always been the church that's been the foundation of where I am.
So, that segues into something else I wanted to ask. Now, how did you specifically get into where you are right now in political communications?
Yeah, so while I was at the NewsHour, I knew that I couldn't be balanced. That was right around the time President Obama came on the scene, and being in news, you're supposed to tell both sides of the story. And I'm like, one side just feels wrong. Okay. And I can't convict myself to, lay it all out here. I feel compelled to be on a side. And then that's when I really saw it's so funny. Exposure really is so important. That's when I realized every member of Congress, every senator, every president, they have a spokesperson. They have a whole team of people doing communications. And I was in, the School of Scripps Howard of Journalism and Communications, but at that time, political communications was not a major. That wasn't anything that was on the docket. So I had no idea this was even a profession, something I could even be in. But I was attracted to it immediately, and I tried to figure out, like, how can I tap into this? And again, here comes my family. Here comes the church, and my dad had just helped Alvin Brown in Jacksonville become the first Black mayor of the city, and worked really, really hard in that election. And I told Alvin Brown what I wanted to do. And he goes, there's one person I want you to meet with and talk with, who happens to be another AME from Detroit, Michigan, who worked in political communications in DC. I sat down with him for coffee. His name is Jamal Simmons, and I quickly moved out of the NewsHour after probably being there, I think, a year and a half, and I went to Rock the Vote. Ironically, it's not super political, but it is. It has a political foundation, and from there, I worked really, really hard. I learned my craft. Writing is super important for this role or these types of jobs. Being able to speak to issues and understand issues and understand people is so critically important. Obviously, you have to understand news, but after Rock the Vote, it kind of felt like I was on like a rocket ship a little bit, because I left there and went to the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, another organization I had no idea existed, but this organization exists only to elect Democratic members of Congress. And when you're in political communications, the whole goal is to be on the record. So when you are reading your newspaper and you see spokesperson said X, Y, and Z, or when you're looking at your television, a spokesperson comes out, that is the goal, right? To be that chief spokesperson. So if you get a new job that gets you closer to that role, you take it. So I took a new job every 2 years, maybe a year and a half. I also made sacrifices and moved from my home in DC at the time to Memphis, Tennessee, to be a press secretary for a congressional race. That was my first time kind of being on the record by myself. And then I went back to DC and took a job as the communications director for the Congressional Black Caucus. And I thought every time I had these jobs, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't even know how I have these jobs. I don't even know how to do these jobs. But I think that's how you're supposed to feel, because you're supposed to grow into what you're doing. You're not supposed to be able to do it automatically, right? And then I had another opportunity to move again to Tampa, Florida, to be the deputy communications director for the state of Florida for President Obama's reelection campaign. And I came back to the Hill, did some more work for congressional leadership, and then I got a call to come to the White House. And my life had changed already, but my life completely changed then. So I took risks. I had to step out on faith many a times. I had the privilege of being able to lean on my parents in ways that I know a lot of young people, especially Black children, cannot do, because they do not come from homes, financial backgrounds where you could rely on your parents to help you pay your rent if you needed to, because these jobs pay nothing. That's the thing. When I moved to DC, I was making $8 an hour. Okay. So you have to have some sort of support. And now I know there's tons of people and there's tons of ways to support young people who want to get into these roles, but you got to know that they're there first. And I didn't really know that until I moved to DC, but really grateful that I found it out quickly.
I remember I was looking, I think it was an Essence. And I think I remember seeing like this montage. It was you and a couple of other, I think they called it like the new generation of these powerful Black women emerging in DC. So can you talk a little bit about, what we're seeing now, which is like, it really is Black girl magic now in DC politics. Everything from Joe Biden's senior advisor, and now you're working over here with Michelle Obama's organization. That just things all over the place, and we have a record number of Black women running for office in both parties.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what we're seeing right now when it comes to that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that we know that Black women are educated. They're the most educated demographic in this country. We're going to school at rates and records that nobody else is. And we're graduating with many, many different degrees. So, I think it's a little bit of a cultural shift as well, right? I look forward to getting married and having my own family one day. But I know that I didn't necessarily have to do that right away. And I think that as time has kind of shifted and we've had more opportunity, and especially we've had, once segregation was ended, right? And Black people had more economic opportunity. That gives you more access to education. That gives you more access to jobs. That gives you more access to figuring out who you are. We've lived in this country for over 400 years, and we have been the working machines. We have not had a time or chance to think about ourselves, who we are as people. I often laugh sometimes at creatives, even though I do think of myself as a creative person, come up with all of these ideas. And I'm like, you can come up with all these ideas because you have all of this money and all this time to think. Like nobody else has time to do those things. But I think in the world in which we're seeing now, women have had more access, and the world is changing rapidly and fast, and realizing not only the worth of women in raising families and leading households and leading communities, but the worth of women sitting in a boardroom, running a corporation, being a bishop in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, understanding that we are equals at the table, and making us equal does not make a man less than. And I think that people have started to awaken to that, even though I think some cultures are a little further behind than others. I mean, in this country, we haven't been able to elect a woman, but we'll see what happens in the next couple of days. But it's so incredibly important to recognize that women deserve a seat at the table. And it really does start at the top of the organization, the top of the community, the top of the family, it really does, to provide more access, more opportunity for women to speak up and be exactly who they are and take on different challenges. And Black women are leading. And we know Black women are leading. I don't want to push back on that. But my only problem with it is that we don't always want to be in these positions, right? I think that sometimes we've been made to be put in these positions, and that's not fair either. Everybody doesn't want to lead at all times, but this is the time of the Black woman, and I'm grateful to be alive, especially being the granddaughter of sharecroppers from Georgia. My grandmother she lived to be 97 years old. She was a lifelong member of Charles Street. She had to, she was a domestic worker for a while. She grew up on a farm. So she could not imagine the life that I am living now. And I am proud, of seeing, the generational changes, and also seeing all of my sisters, as being the youngest, seeing all of my sisters stand up and who they are, and proudly be who they are and take on the world in their own way, has shown me and really illuminated for me what I can be. And I think that more young women are see all of these different examples, from my boss Michelle Obama all the way down to a Nancy Pelosi. Women are seeing women take charge, and it's been inspiring. But we don't always want to lead. I think we've been put in positions where we have to, because we have to stand in the gap, and we're running the homes and we're running the communities as well. But we definitely need partners in that.
There's so much to unpack here, and I'm trying to make sure that I get through all this because there's so much we could talk about. But I was reading an interview that you did on a podcast, and you talked about how Valerie Jarrett got you involved in this particular job. And I'm being in Chicago right now. I mean, I'm well acquainted with, Valerie Jarrett and the Obamas from this local perspective. But can you talk a little bit about what you saw in the Obama White House? What are some of your highlights? And what are you doing in your job right now with Michelle Obama?
Yeah, so Valerie, what's so funny is that Valerie has always been someone I admired. What I love about Valerie is that she is a leader that that loves to hear from people. Oftentimes in politics, especially presidential politics, you don't really get to the table, especially if you're a junior level staff. It might take you a while to get to the table. And when you get to the table, you might not be able to say anything. You're so nervous. But, Valerie played such a central role in where I am today. When I worked at the White House, I started out as the associate communications director because I was still on the communications track fully and totally. And what that meant was that I did a lot of the domestic policy announcements that the president would make. So if he went to the veterans, the VA, to make an announcement about veterans care and it was new policy, I would figure out how are we rolling out this message? Who are the reporters we're talking to? How are we setting up this story? But also, how are we bringing the entire weight of the government behind this moment? Because we're going to have the president stand up to speak about this. So bringing in that type of organization was my job, and also giving the direction and keeping everybody on the same page and singing from the same hymnal or song was what I was tasked to do. And it was great. But sometimes in politics, it's kind of the same play over and over again. You do what's safe. You go to the Associated Press, you go to the Washington Post, the same kind of story again and again and again. And I remember starting to feel like, I'm getting a little burned out. And I kid you not, I prayed. I said, "Oh, Jesus, I don't know how much longer I can do this," because the work is hard, the hours are long, and I was starting not to feel as fulfilled, and I wanted to be more creative. And I got the chance to go over to the Office of Public Engagement when my friend was leaving her role. She's burnt out, and her role was as the basically the director of African American outreach. The title is different. It's a senior public engagement advisor, but that's essentially what the job was. And I interviewed with Valerie amongst many other people. And I remember it was literally in Charleston when the president gave that speech at the funeral of Reverend Clement Pinckney. And being at the White House in that moment was really crazy, because I'm like, now I guarantee there's no other bishop's children or clergy children at the White House right now in this moment. And this happened to our church. And I remember feeling like, nobody's asked me how we should approach this or anything, and kind of being in my feelings about it. And a friend of mine who actually happens to be, she grew up AME in Texas, said to me, "Girl, just tell them you want to help. You want to do something, like speak up." And in that moment, I was like, "You're right." So I said, "Hey, you can call on me. I'm happy to help facilitate, this. I know that we're potentially planning to send the president down. Like, I'm happy to step up here." And they were like, "Go to the meeting like in an hour with Valerie." So I came to this meeting with her, and they were talking about something around the program. And I was like, "That won't work, but this is what could work. And this is what could happen. I'm happy to talk to the church about this or that." Right. And Valerie said, "Okay, let's listen to Stephanie. You're going." So she sent me down to South Carolina. And I remember when the president and first lady got there, I had the most senior bishops lined up and to talk with or to greet the president. And my dad, I could hear my dad say, instead of like, "I'm Bishop McKinley Young," he's like, "I'm Stephanie's father." I'm like, "Daddy, you do not know who I am." But he said that to the president. He said it to the vice president. And I walked them out to their seats, as the program the program was already underway. And I just remember that being such a monumental moment, because you feel like when you're with church people, it feels like you are with your family. I literally have my parents sitting right here. I'm literally here on behalf of the White House, but I'm also working on behalf of the church in this moment. And when we went backstage after the funeral, after he greeted every family, after he signed all these programs and did all of these things, he and Vice President Joe Biden, Valerie said to me to come over. And she goes, "Well, Mr. President, Heather's leaving," because Heather was there, the woman who I replaced. And she goes, "But Stephanie's taking her job." And I was like, that's how I found out. Wow. Come over to meet Mrs. Obama, for the first time personally, and said and did the same thing. And I remember just kind of being on this crazy high of a moment. Like, I couldn't believe this happened. I mean, we're in this travesty. We're in this super terrible moment that's happened of hatred and violence and racism. And then I'm offered this opportunity right in the middle of this. And also same-sex marriage was legalized that day. That's the day the White House was lit up and all of the rainbow colors. So it was such a monumental moment in my life, connected to church and also connected to Valerie, who has thus been this huge figure and been a person that has said, I want to hear what you have to say. What are your ideas? What are your thoughts? And actually listens. And takes the advice that I give, and has really given me the confidence to understand that my voice really does matter, and I really do belong and deserve to be at the table. And I know that I would not be as confident if I had not had a Valerie, in my life. Obviously, my parents, my mother especially, everybody has pushed me, but Valerie has definitely been almost like my very political godmother, and she's invested in me in a way that no one else has. And I think that a lot of Black professionals live in a space where they may not have like a mentor or someone who invests in them. You go to job after job and you're working with these white ladies or, whoever, and they don't really see themselves in you. So they might not really invest in you in the way that you need to be invested in so that you actually can excel. But Valerie was that person and has been that person for me. So when she called me over to do this, I couldn't say no. And I was working in the private sector at the time. I was at NBC Universal Cable Entertainment after I just left BET. And I was helping them setting up this Erase the Hate internal kind of campaign that they wanted to do. And I wasn't being fulfilled, really. And when she called me and said that, the First Lady would really like for me to consider doing this, and I said, absolutely. So I'm here. And so what I do now is Mrs. Obama started When We All Vote in 2018. That's when I started. And it's a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We're on a mission to change the culture around voting. And for us, that means being a part of culture and all facets of culture. So I do all of the brand work for the organization. I do every large activation we do, every couch party, every event that we have that deals with anything culturally related. I'm a part of that. And coming up with that process and also that strategy and what that looks like. Also on the communications front as well. So every story that's written, every television interview, all of those things come from my team. So I run the talent team, the culture / talent team really at When We All Vote. And we're helping to really change the culture by making sure When We All Vote is a part of the culture. So from the Roots Picnic, we're doing a big music festival the night before the election, One Music Festival. We're partnering with that. We also did a West Wing special. They came back to do one show. Voting, and we also did a comedy special on ABC with Kevin Hart. So there's been all of these moments where we've been a part of culture. We've broken through. We had DJ D Nice do our first couch party, which is basically people texting voters, being trained in texting voters from home, so volunteering from home with DJ D Nice DJing. So figuring out how are we a part of the conversation? Because the reason why we're in this situation in the first place is because 47% of Americans voted in 2016, and the numbers have just been going down and down and down and down and down. So it's my job to figure out how are we reaching people where they are, right? And not going in the traditional route of like CNN and MSNBC and kind of the same plug and plays that you see, but rather how are we breaking out of that mold and reaching people where they are?
So are you seeing any impacts now? I mean, because, we're 12 days away. So 11 days away. So are you all beginning to measure impacts among likely voters, or how are you going to track?
So let me just say this. Around last week, it was about 7 million people had already voted. No, I'm sorry. 9 million people had already voted early. Around that time in 2016, I think it was about 400,000 people had voted. So we went from 400,000 people early voting about 3 weeks before the election to almost 10 million people voting. Mm-hmm. So yes, I've absolutely seen an impact in 2018 specifically. It was the largest youth voter turnout that we've seen in, I think, decades or ever. I want to make sure I have that stat right. I think it's ever. Even though 2/3 of young people still did not vote, but we still saw a huge impact when it came to the numbers that we saw of folks who actually did come out. So I'm seeing it. We're feeling it. We have almost 50,000 people who are super volunteers organizing their communities. We have over 200 partners, corporate, nonprofit, community, media partners. We never had that many people reach out to try to work with us. So everybody is trying to put their effort into ensuring that they are not just a part of this election, but they are paying more attention. How do they have their say in this government, in this democracy, which is us, right? And I think that people realize they've been asleep at the wheel. So yeah, I've seen impact. We have these young people, part of our My School Votes program. We have sent over, I think 1 million DMs. So what that means is like these DMs and saying, hey, get registered to vote. So, I mean, we're not playing games, and there's so much energy that we're seeing and that we're feeling, even though we're in COVID and we haven't had that kind of one-on-one face-to-face interaction. What we did do is food and voter registration drives in cities around the country, and we saw a big impact in that. Number one, there's a huge need. People need things, considering the economy has kind of tanked because of everything that we are experiencing, and many other reasons. And then in addition to that, we're going into early vote activations this weekend. We have some events coming up in partnership with More Than a Vote, LeBron James's organization, where we're doing and providing food and resources for people at polling places around the country. So yeah, there's a lot of energy, and I feel optimistic. I feel good. You know, there's situations where you're like, okay, maybe I should do this or maybe I should do that. I actually feel like I've worked extremely hard. I'm confident in the work that we've done. I'm confident in the work that my team has done. And I feel like we are literally leaving it all out on the field. And I will be proud on November 3rd, knowing that I did everything that I could do.
So speaking of which, what do we do after November the 3rd? Because, what can be done to keep this engagement, to be motivated and be engaged beyond voting after November the 3rd? Because that's what we're talking about right now. How do we move forward?
Yeah, well, look, this is the problem. The problem is that we only talk about voting now, right? Mm-hmm. In 2018, it was a big midterm, so press were interested. But I'll say at 2019, in 2019, when we were starting to pick back up again, these people did not want to talk about voting at all. Like, when I say these people, I mean press. They're like, voting, schmoting. And it's not just the press, it's us. Like, we don't do voter registration drives at churches in off seasons. We only do it when it's supposed to happen. We don't invite our elected officials to come talk to us about what they are doing for our community. We let them come in during a campaign season, right? I know it's not everywhere, right? I know it's not every. What happened? Oh, can you hear me? Okay. All right. No, what I was saying was that the problem is that we don't engage in politics unless it's a political season, and that's a problem. We have to continuously talk about voting. So what people can do now is they could join When We All Vote. They can make sure that they are on our email list, getting all of the information. We have a program called My School Votes, which integrates voting into school systems across this country. So they could join the My School Votes program to make sure their kids' schools are engaged. A big part of the problem is that civic engagement is not taught at all in our schools anymore. So we're not training the next voters, the next voting generation, but rather we're like, figure it out on your own, which is irresponsible. And we have to take control of that. And we have to talk about voting all the time. It has to be incorporated into our language, into who we are. And it cannot be when there's a big election, when there's a big moment. And that's why Ms. Obama wanted this to be a nonpartisan organization, because she didn't want it to be about one party, one moment, one person, but rather she wanted to be about the act of voting. And for one of the things that I'm supposed to be doing with my job is, figuring out how to infiltrate television in a different way. So as all these screenwriters are writing all of these stories to come up for the next couple of years, I need to be having conversations with them about inserting voting. And what I mean by that is, take Insecure, for example. Instead of and Molly going to dinner, they could go vote together and have an argument while they're sitting in line voting. It's like,
you actually can do that. You actually are going to go talk. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, you could. Yes, you can do those things. These are the relationships that we have with media companies, but also with showrunners, the people who create these things. But that's how, think about it. Think about women's rights. Think about even LGBTQ rights. All of that stuff has been written into the content that you're consuming. And people are like, it's a conspiracy. No, it's not. It's a group. It's an organization that sees a need and understands that we have to normalize certain things. So how do you do that? You have to write it into culture. So, But what the church can really do is ensure that they're talking about voting year round. How many voters are you registering every year, every 6 months? You can set goals. Beyond that, the YPD really could take hold of training young people. They can be a part of the My School Votes program and saying, how are we training from a small age all the way up? We do voting in our in every conference that we have. It's a part of everything. So why wouldn't we take it a step further? Why wouldn't we institute it in a way that's real and tangible, and that goes across the connection? It's not one district does this. Okay, well, y'all did that. We want to do ours differently. We don't have time for that anymore. We really have to make sure that we're doing things cross-connectional, at least, in the United States and abroad. They all have elections, right? So figuring out what is that civic engagement arm that we're really pulling, not that we're pulling when we're in a disaster, and not that we're pulling when we really want to get this one person elected, but what are we pulling on every year? What are we pushing in legislation? How are we really motivating young people to be a part of the process in a way that's real and really a part of the conversation?
So we were talking about earlier before we began recording about the relevancy of the AME Church and about where we need to go from here. Can we talk? I think this leads right into that again, about looking at how we change and shift to reach Generation Z. What's our future looking like? So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So look, I think this pandemic that's shaken us all to the core, right? It has completely changed this world. Okay. We in the United States are feeling the brunt end of it because of how poorly it's been handled here, but it's so critically important to see what's happening. We're not only are we in a global pandemic, but we also have civil unrest, right? We have continued police violence, continued lost life or Black lives from police and from others, vigilantes, people who think that they're the police. And we have consistent protests in the streets. And what I feel and what I am seeing is a void. There are some people, don't get me wrong, from the faith community. There are some, shining stars out there who are pushing their way forward and trying to lead and be a part of the movement. But it does feel like the church is leading from behind. And I know and I understand that we're up against some really monumental problems that we have never faced before, from ensuring our memberships are safe, ensuring that we have enough resources so that we're able to get to the people while we are all in need. Like, yes, this whole thing has, I think, exposed, some of the weaknesses that we have, which are how are we excelling technologically? How are we communicating virtually in a strong way, consistently across the board, And I can't express that enough, because I do think there are some churches that have it down, and there's many churches that don't. And I, for the life of me, don't understand why this church, I don't care how big it is, can't help this church figure it out, and why we can't come together and figure out certain things. So like streaming services, beyond just streaming services, like how are we really helping our people in need, but also how are we leading from the front, and staying on top of things in a way that is, I think, a little quicker, right? And being out there. And I think that this is a good opportunity for everybody to reset. I know I'm resetting personally. I feel like a lot of people are resetting personally. I think institutions are resetting. The government has to reset completely. There's no going back to normal. There's no normal anymore. So everybody has to figure out the new normal. And this is a great opportunity for the church to figure out, how are we going to be a part of this conversation? And for the AME Church, that's always been on the forefront, how are we going to reclaim that space? Because in every job that I've had, in every space that I've been in, whenever we need something, I always knew I could call in the church. I'm like, no, our church is organized. We have it down pat. We know how to communicate with each other and move forward quickly and really organize a community. And we do. We have all the ingredients, but we have to catch up on the technology side, because we're way behind. And Gen Z, look, I've lived in New York City. I've spent a ton of time in Los Angeles. I lived in Washington, D.C., but in New York City, actually, I'm not going to say it scared me, but in New York, I realized young Black people my age, are not going to church. Yep. They're just not. They don't think it's that important. They believe, in being spiritual, whatever that means, and they don't go. It's not convenient. That sounds crazy, but that's how people view it. And I'm not this is not an anomaly. Like, this is happening across the board. And the churches that they are choosing to go to are, I mean, they're not my cup of tea, but they're different and they're more convenient. Like, I remember visiting this church in my community in New York one time. It was not Black, and that's just not me. I'm obviously an AME, so I couldn't really get down with it. But they had this idea of grouping people in the same communities together and doing dinners, like as Bible studies. So you go in your neighborhood with a group of people, and somebody says, you're going to come over to my house for dinner. And that's really the Bible study. So you don't have to go to the facility, the church, wherever it is, but instead you do something that you normally would do. Like, oh, I'm going to my friend's house for dinner, but instead it's Bible study. And like, that's not rocket science. That just took somebody a moment to say, how can we reach people in a way that's unique? And it's different. It's tapping into what people are culturally doing and interested in, from brunch to dinner to whatever. It was, how are we a part of the conversation in a different way? And I think that what our church has, beyond its amazing and beautiful revolutionary history, that should inspire any person that feels like they are a part of a Black Lives Matter movement or any type of movement, because we are a movement of a church, right? We were founded out of protest. We have the story, we have the foundation, we have all of the ingredients. It's just that we have to figure out how to bring all those pieces together and do things a little different so that we are reaching people where they are. But I know that the church has a wealth of riches from the people that have been a part of this denomination, who are in this denomination still to this day. I think of people like Joy McKenzie, who had an amazing big job at Essence Magazine. I know she just got an amazing big job at another big media company. I think of Stephen Green and all the work that he did with the NAACP and all of the hard work that he continues to do. I see the ingredients that are there, and there are people I think that are at the table that can come help and say, look, maybe we should approach things this way. And for me, what I think is special and supposed to be special about the church is, it's not about whose idea it is. It's not about, where it's originated from, but it should be about the content of the idea. And I think that we get stuck on, well, if that person recommended that, I don't want to do it. And that is the wrong attitude to have. And you can't have that attitude in government. You can't have that attitude in a corporation. You can't, because if you do, you fail. Nothing will work. So I think that this is a time for us to all step back and say, how can we do this better? How can we all support each other? How can we stop making it about one person, one moment, but rather, how are we looking ahead? And ahead is going to look very different. It's going to look very different. And I feel like this is God, like, really trying to stop us all and to reorganize ourselves in the way in which we're moving in this world. And there is a hole, and there is a need for faith, and there is a need for church right now. There really, really is. And I don't want our church to miss out on that, fulfilling that need. I don't want us to lead from behind. But there are all these different people jumping up, creating these random things left and right. And if we are not bringing in different voices to the table to figure out how can we keep up with these times, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And I've been thinking about writing something about how I feel about all of these things because of how much the church has given me, and how much I love this church and admire this church and want to see it grow. But I'm personally afraid. But as a person of faith, I do understand that, what we see is not always the reality. And God moves in many different ways, and he will see us through this. But we gotta listen. We don't want to be in the wilderness for 40 years, do we? Really? I don't.
Well, we don't have 40 years to be in the wilderness.
No.
But no. I know our time's drawing to a close. I have two questions I want to ask. Just on that point, what advice specifically can you give those AMEs under 40, those people who are still here in the church, like you, like me, regarding their career and regarding their faith? Yeah.
Well, first I'll say, no matter what the world tells you, okay, and the world gives you, meaning like, oh, you really got to go to church. Look, I fall and pray to it. Trust and believe. Like, you have to still figure out how to be a part of the life of the church, no matter what. And I look to my dad for inspiration for when he and many other young people stood up and said they wanted to vote at the general conference. They demanded that. They worked together. They worked through that, and they did it. I know it was him and Matthew Watley's father, and a number of other people. So they saw the value in the church, and I really hope that people under 40 still see the value in the church. But beyond seeing the value in the church, understand that this is our church, and if we don't invest in it, just like if we don't invest in our government, it's not going to work. And it won't work for us, and we won't see the things that we want to see. So I'm speaking to myself here. We have to invest in the church, and it has to go beyond. It has to go beyond. Let me just be super blunt and straightforward. It has to go beyond like spiritual health and well-being. That is obviously what the church offers, right? It's supposed to be a moral compass, supposed to give you all those things. But this is also an organization. It's a nonprofit organization. It's like a business. So if you have those skills, if you are in the world right now and you are excelling in your life and in your job, you need to bring those skills to your church, to your local church, to your conference, to your district, to the connection, to the denomination. You can do that. And also people need to open the door and let people do that as well. let people come in with those ideas as well. But like, that's what the Black church is supposed to be, this community, right? Of all of us bringing all of our gifts and talents to the table to create this entity that will be the heartbeat of the community. And if we're not bringing our gifts and talents to the table, if we're only coming because we want to feel like, a spark from God today, or if we're only coming because we want to check a box, but we're not going to be a part of the life of the church, then we don't deserve the church because we're not giving to the church. So that's what I would implore everybody, including myself. What are the gifts that you can give? What are the things that you can do to help push this church forward and keep this church on the forefront and moving forward? And then also for those who are working really hard in their careers and still trying to figure it out, I would say this: like, look, life is full of many swift transitions, and we have to. One thing I know is that nothing will be given to you. It is not given to you. You have to work hard. And I think that in this new kind of Gen Z, millennial social media generation, you feel like, creating a profile on Instagram is just as important as doing your work. And it's just not. Do your work. And you can create a profile, your brand, whoever you want to be out in the world on social media at another time. It's not, and it should not be about you. It should be about the work. So I really hope that people are what they are doing. They're inspired to do. They're inspired to do that work, right? Because I do believe that creates a stronger workforce, a stronger, I won't even say community. We just lost him, but I'm going to keep going because we're being recorded. But it's so important to be passionate about what you're doing so that you do it well. And don't lose faith. Don't lose hope, but continue to work hard. And at some point you are going to see the results. So keep your faith, work hard, give back, and it will come to you. So John, I don't know what's going to happen, but I think I'm going to log off. Hopefully this is recorded.
I am so sorry. My Windows blew up on me. That I've never had that happen before in my life.
It's okay.
So my computer has.
Is your uh-oh. You're frozen.
I don't believe this. My windows just blew up. I'll end it. Windows just blew up.